Ahoy! Welcome to the Writer Talks. Much has been written and spoken about dreams. Do they drive us, determine us, devastate us, or impel us to dream on further and direct us to actualize our potential? The answer perhaps lies in the choices that we make. My guest today, Sandra Johnson, the profound academic and graduate in journalism who worked at organizations like the Rolls-Royce and later switched to teaching and going on to becoming an assistant head teacher at one of the top schools in England, has had a life that is akin to a novel itself. Having graduated in journalism, she had successful assignments and was then swept away by, as she describes, a whirlwind romance. She married, and owing to paucity in commute and options at her new place, she chose to teach. While she signed up to teach English with math as a second subject, as luck would have it, she excelled so much that she ended up heading the math department and eventually going on to becoming the assistant head teacher at one of the top schools in England. Finally, in 2014, she hung up her boots as an academic owing to personal health conditions and to tend to her ailing father. However, her dream of being a writer stayed on with her and now impelled her more than ever before to write, resulting in inspired works. Sandra, with a particular penchant for metaphysical poetry, has penned refreshing verses in her charmingly entitled collection, I Needed to Drink Tea with You, that is distinct and evocative with a rich tapestry of allusions, alliterations, and images. Scorpion Tales, her short story collection, is, to quote her, a smorgasbord with something for everyone. And her recently published novel Redemption is an enduring piece that probes the consequences of a crime from the eyes of a victim. So watch Sandra Johnson discuss her life and her works in today's episode. In fact, to commemorate 4 months of Writer Talks, 4 months of having been with all of you, I have introduced a new section entitled Rapid Response Section. In fact, we begin with this, where I shall be posing a set of questions to the writer, who then makes a rapid response to these questions and also briefly explain the choices that they make. I hope you enjoy it as much as we did asking those questions and answering them quickly. Without further ado, let us dive in and listen to this very profound poetic writer and academic speak of her poems, her writers group, the delightful Leaky Pens, do a book reading of her poems, as well as from a section of her novel Redemption, amongst other things. But before that, please like, share, and subscribe to the Writer Talks. Thank you all for the immense support that you have been extending. Please continue to encourage your friends to subscribe to the Writer Talks so that we can continue such literary engagements with brilliant writers from across the world. Do write in your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. I hope you enjoy watching Sandra Johnson speak with me on the Writer Talks. Until next week, read, write, reflect, stay happy, and stay true to your dreams. Ahoy! Ahoy! Welcome to the Writer Talks. Sandra Johnson, delighted to have you here.
Thank you.
So, since you're from England, let's begin on a note of tradition. We'll start with discussion of the weather. How's the weather been today?
Today it's been a beautiful English spring day and the sun's been shining and my husband's been gardening and it's just been perfect.
That does sound extremely perfect. So which is your favorite season?
I enjoy the summer when I can get the most out of the garden and enjoy sitting in it and entertaining in it, if we're allowed to entertain this year.
Right, understandably. So yeah, that brings me to this some quick fire questions then. If you had to choose between the English tea and strawberry and cream, which would you pick?
English tea every time.
Why is that?
Because I'm addicted to tea. I was brought up on it, so life without tea It's just not imaginable.
Right. So that's your elixir.
That's right, yes.
All right. So between tennis and cricket, which would you pick?
Tennis every time.
And who's your favorite in tennis?
I really, really don't have one. I just enjoy Wimbledon and I enjoy the whole fortnight, and then I forget about tennis for a very long time.
Right. Between Shakespeare and Jane Austen, whom would you pick?
Couldn't choose between them because I've studied them both and I love them both. But I suppose Shakespeare by a hair's breadth.
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. My next question is all the more teasing. Between math and English, which would you pick? In your case, it's a very valid question.
Well, as a maths teacher, I love my maths, but I couldn't live without literature, so it had to be English.
Right. Fair enough. Have you ever, gone off speaking about English language and literature in your math classes? Has that ever happened?
I certainly have. When we were doing construction geometry with compasses and pencils, I read my class a poem by John Donne, one of his sonnets, where he says he and his love are like a pair of compasses. And I just couldn't resist.
Valediction for winning morning. That's lovely. That's also one of my favorite books.
John Donne speaks to my heart.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that's true. Metaphysical poetry is so unique.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can't beat the metaphysicals, and I think that is quite an influence on my poetry.
Fair enough. I could see traces of that when I read a couple of your poems.
Well, that's interesting and pleasing.
Now, you have a degree in journalism, and then you trained to teach, and then you opted to teach English, and ended up teaching math. So much so that you were at one of the top schools in England. You've been heading the math department, and then you were the assistant head teacher. Amazing. So, would you like to speak about your teaching experience and then how it all adds up to your writing?
I didn't ever intend to teach. I intended to write, and I intended to write professionally. And I trained as a journalist very successfully, and I'd got job offers all over the country. But very fortunately, I had met my husband, and we had a whirlwind romance, and we bought a house. And that settled me in an area where there were no job offers. So I had to go to work for a living, and it just didn't work for me being in an office. And at the same time, I was doing voluntary work with young children, and I was getting more fun out of my voluntary work than I was out of my paid employment at Rolls-Royce. So once we could afford for me to stop earning, I went back to university and retrained.
Right.
And that's how I became a teacher. And teaching became a passion that kept me happy until I had to give up when, unfortunately, I just couldn't do the physicality anymore because of problems with my spine.
Right. And you gave up teaching, you stopped teaching when?
2014. Which was lovely because at that time my poor father, who was struggling away on his own, suddenly needed more help to remain independent. And so as I gave up, I was able to help my dad and help him with no limits on my time. So it was just perfection. But unfortunately, he died in 2017. my little world fell to pieces, and so my husband and I sold up. We sold all our furniture, bought a new house, moved to the country, made a completely fresh start, and I joined a writing circle, and the rest is history.
Right. So this writing circle, your trusted bunch of confidants, inspirers, is that your group, your go-to group when you want an honest criticism, constructive criticism for your work?
It certainly is. They encourage, but they are honest in their criticism, but it's always constructive, and they are the most wonderful, wonderful group of people, because not only do they help with the writing, but each one of them is a real friend who you could turn to if you had to, and it's just been a privilege to have met them and been accepted by them and become a part of the group. And they're called the Leaky Pens, and we live in East Leek, a little village, and so we're the Leaky Pens.
Lovely. What a delightful name that is.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of names, I mean, I'm completely fascinated by the titles that you have. You have written in all three genres. You've got a poetry collection to your name, you've got a short story collection, and your latest book is a novel, and it's a romance genre. Again, coming back to the names, I needed to drink tea with you. That's an amazing title. How did you conceive this?
It's a bit heartbreaking, actually. My father was in hospital, and he was due to come home the next day, and in the night I got a phone call. And by the time I got to the hospital, my dad had passed away. And what I did whenever I visited my dad, we always had a cup of tea. Always. And all I could think of when I saw him, as if he was asleep, I said to him, I'll have a cup of tea with you. And so I asked the nurse to make it. And that poem exorcised the anguish I couldn't cope with, which was why my husband and I made a fresh start. So it was a tribute to my dad, but it was also cathartic in releasing the sort of anguish I couldn't deal with in any other way but by writing.
Totally relate. And it's a lovely backstory behind the title. Very interesting.
It's not a poem I could ever read aloud, but it means a lot to me because of the healing process.
I get it. Now, from this really delightful section of poems, I particularly enjoy the refreshing imagery, the illusions, the multiple illusions, the alliterations. In fact, I thought we'll begin by speaking about this particular poem, the alliterative sensuous summer, flagrant fragrance.
Okay.
How did you think of this poem?
I personified all four seasons. So spring was a young warrior bursting through the soil with new shoots. Summer was a very sensuous woman who during the course of the season matures to full ripeness and goes beyond full ripeness. And she's a bounteous, giving woman, almost too giving. And then I went on to autumn. I personified autumn as a shaman, a trickster, and winter as a icy villain. So summer is the full-bodied, sensuous lady.
So how do you that explains the interesting imagery that the choice of imagery that you imbued in this poem. How do you write your poems actually? Do you write it all in one sitting or do you work in bits and pieces?
When I write a poem, I start with the initial concept and I I actually write pen and paper, and I scribble it down, then I rephrase it, then I examine the language. I am passionate about structure. I think structure, whether it be a free structure or a tight structure, the rhythm, the sense of it has to be right. So that I'm working on all the time, and then I transfer it to a type copy on my computer and fine tune it, and that's the process. But it takes me a very, very long time to write a poem because I examine every word.
Understandably, and I can actually say this since you mentioned Shameless Shaman. Again, the choice of diction, the illusions, they're so unique, so powerful and evocative. In fact, I noted down a couple of them. Master of Prosopia, Klimt Grint Splendor, Cruel Lothario, really refreshing. How
Thank
did
you.
you think of this particular book?
It was just the idea that trees in all their glory, in all their beautiful glory for autumn, and they really are spectacular, inevitably lose that glory. So I imagine them as trees sort of tricked into thinking they were in their finest hour, not realizing that the leaves would drop and they would be left bare and desolate. And the idea that autumn had tricked them into pride in their wonderful colours and hues, which I think is a little bit different to the normal season of mists and mellow fruitfulness.
Absolutely. So, it's very interesting. Could I request you to read either one of these two? Either one, or yours.
Can we go for Sensuous Summer because it's slightly easier to read aloud.
And there's lovely rhythm to it.
Thank you. It's called Sensuous Summer Flagrant Flagrance because as I read it, I really expect the image of the heady scent of a full-blown rose. And it's that absolutely unashamed strength of fragrance. Blousy, sensual, sweet-scented season, fast burst from buds of early days. Heady with heat, you abandon reason, your blossoms tumble in brazen ways. Abundant, opulent, shameless bouquets of full-bodied heady roses. Your shower of bursting blooms cascade and spray onto sun-scorched earth, drowning it in flower. Beneath your easy, eager-pleasing ways lies tender heart that, though it likes to flirt and seek attention and adoring gaze, can be wounded, damaged, deeply hurt. Then your tears fall as drought and longed for rain. Your sighs so hard stir leaves on trees. Your moan thunders through darkened skies to ease your pain, and on soaked soil your battered gifts lie prone. Resigned, you slap on shaky scarlet smile, and with rouge you redden raddled cheeks. Your pungent perfume will linger just a while, flagrant fragrance for last, fast, fleeting weeks.
So fabulous. It's absolutely riveting. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Who's your favorite poet besides John Donne, of course?
That's very difficult. I was passionately keen on Philip Larkin, but his later works, when he became angry, I found difficult to relate to. But his earlier works and his use of language, I thought was absolutely mesmerising. And beyond John Donne and Philip Larkin, I have a fondness for D.H. Lawrence, surprisingly enough. I think he is a master of poetry.
Right.
And my favourite is Odour of Chrysanthemums.
Wow, lovely. I'm very fond of D.H. Lawrence. but I'm more fond of his novels. I just cannot forget Something Lovers. I think I must have read it at least 4 times.
I have read his novels so many times, my copies are dog-eared.
Right. Moving on to your short story collection, you described that as a smorgasbord and understandably so. Scorpion Tales again. How did this come about?
Every story in the anthology has a surprise at the end. It might be a nasty surprise or a silly surprise, but the end always comes unexpectedly. And it was just a attempt of mine to pull in all the various styles that I write in, because I don't have one genre, I don't have one style, and I was just experimenting with the genre of the short story to see how much you can convey within a very few words.
Right. And then what made you consider writing a novel? Your most recent novel being Redemption. And it's an interesting plot line where you're examining this idea of crime from the perspective of a victim, the consequences of the crime from the perspective of the victim. How did you think of this?
I think I presume it's the same in India. There's a great interest in mental health at the moment, and it's been neglected for years and not talked about. And I think that was what was in my mind, the spectre of mental health and the fight to conquer it or to get it under control. And that was my inspiration, because the victim is scarred physically, badly, but most of all mentally, in ways that conventional wisdom can't just click their fingers or prescribe a pill to make it go away. And that was where I was coming from.
So was there any particular incident that inspired this character, Red Fantasy?
Just as I've described the impact of mental illness, and I had this idea of someone who was reduced to nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, by a trauma, a crime, and how they then created a new life for themselves. And what I particularly wanted to do was abandon the idea of the crime being the important thing, the finding of the perpetrator, the seeking clues. I wasn't interested in that. I just feel it's been done better by many other people. I was more interested in the rebuild of a very fragile, damaged young woman.
And the novel really draws you as a reader, it draws you into the workings of Red's mind. You can actually experience the agony that she was going through.
That is the hope, but it's called Redemption because it isn't just about the bleakness of mental illness. It's about a very steady, very long climb to recovery. And it's also about the reaction of people on that journey, because not everybody is sensitive to someone's struggles, that they may be presenting a normal face, but inside they're hurting. And it was the dynamic between the people that this girl Beth Anderson meets on the journey that I think is interesting and makes it sustain its interest. Well, I hope so anyway.
I'm sure. I really, really found it extremely engaging. So since we are discussing redemption, could I request you to read your favorite section from the novel?
I'm ever so sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm sorry, since we are discussing redemption, could I request you to read your favorite section from the novel?
I don't have so much a favourite section, but what I thought I would read would be the starting point for this traumatised woman, and the point at which, having failed to take her own life, which was meticulously planned and thwarted quite unexpectedly. So it was no cry for help. She's abandoned all her possessions. She's sent them all to the council tip. She's tried to kill herself, and she eventually, having been patched up in the hospital, is dispatched to a psychiatric hospital, and this is her at her lowest ebb. And although it's a bit bleak, from then on, hope and help start to filter in. So here we go. She was ready for discharge, but there was nowhere to discharge her to. She had rendered herself homeless, and she was totally without possessions. The only clothes she had left were the blood-stained heap that had been put soaking wet into a hospital plastic sack. She had absolutely nothing else. It was impossible to believe she would not try to end her life again, because she had prepared for her demise so meticulously. This had been no cry for help. She resolutely refused to allow them to contact her parents, and, as far as they could discern, she had no support network. She would not engage with the psychiatric team beyond polite, non-committal replies, nor could she tell them her next intentions. She wasn't being difficult. She simply did not know the answers herself. But ultimately, she was blocking a medical bed that was needed, and a decision was taken to transfer her to a psychiatric hospital as an inpatient. She hated the idea, but could offer no safe alternative that would satisfy them. They moved her quickly. Even had they wanted to do more for her, they needed the bed she was occupying. As they told her of the situation, she could see the inevitability of the mood, but it was more a case of wearied resignation than acceptance. She had awoken from her intended sleep of death to find she had to recreate herself. She was the girl with no past. She had no home, no belongings, and absolutely no desire to revisit the events that had brought her to this. She was nobody. Her attempt to escape from it all, so carefully planned, had been foiled by accident, and as she entered the psychiatric unit, she saw no way forward.
Very touching. And healing is such a personal process, and it's such a time-consuming process. Emotional scars do not go away so easily.
Yes, but it isn't a depressing book, and there is humour in it, and there is hope, and there is resolution in the end. But it is a well, I hope it is a realistic look at someone's struggle to overcome the adversity of mental illness that was not her fault at all. She is the victim of a violent crime.
True. I mean, it's not easy overcoming such kind of breakdowns. It's easier said. No matter how many cases or how many books you read about it, it's always a challenge.
And I truly believe everyone's journey is unique to them, and I do not think there is a panacea, there is not a cure-all, there's not a pill. There is just a journey that takes as long as it takes. And if the person is fortunate, there are helping hands along the way, and the book does provide helping hands.
I'm sure it does. Now, you've written poems, you've written short stories, you've also written a novel now. Which one do you think you're most at home with? You have a particular proclivity for one of those?
If I've got something in my mind that I want to express, such as I needed to drink tea with you or whatever, then poetry gets to the gets to the depth of my soul. And I hope when it's read by others that it's appreciated, that it is actually a soul-searching, genuine experience. When I write a novel. My second one is written but in revision at the moment. I am telling a story and exploring themes, and I enjoy that very much. So the two are equal, to be honest.
Fair enough. Now, any particularly favored novelists that you have?
Novelist, yes. My very favourite in modern times has been Stieg Larsson's trilogy, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, because that seemed to come out of nowhere and it was so powerful. It's tragic that we'll hear no more from him. Recently, I've been captivated by originality, and I wrote down some titles that they came out of the blue and they really, really grabbed my attention. I don't know if you've read Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine.
No, I haven't.
That's quite unique, but its originality is just brilliant. I enjoyed reading Gone Girl. I enjoyed reading Girl on the Train, but I didn't really enjoy the films because I just felt they were lost in translation. And a very strange one that I enjoyed was a Jojo Moyes, which was After You, which was a very, very difficult theme, handled sensitively and lightly, but beautifully. So that's the modern stuff. But sorry, it has to be D.H. Lawrence every time.
Right, fair enough. I would second that as well. Now, what is your writing process like? When do you usually write?
I write in the afternoon. I shut myself off in a room where I can see the garden, and I write there. But what I am writing has been pre-written in my head over a series of weeks. And I thought you'd be interested. The novel Redemption, I have in front of me the whole of the written plan. The whole of it. This is the only thing I wrote down other than using the keyboard to write the chapters.
Amazing. Right.
But if I'm ironing, if I'm peeling potatoes, I am in my head constructing character, constructing plot, constructing dialogue. So when I do go into my little quiet room, it's already there and it's all ready to flow. And so at the time I start writing, I've got a whole novel in my head in detail, and that's how I write. And I don't know if other writers use that technique, but it works for me.
So that's lovely. I've been talking to quite a few writers of late. It's very interesting to understand the writing process. And each person, just like the writing, it's the writing process is equally unique. And that makes for another interesting study on its own.
It's strange because when I sit at the keyboard, the story's already written and it's just a matter of flow from brain to keyboard, and it's remarkably quick. And my beta readers have sometimes been quite surprised how quickly the novel evolves, because they tend to read it in sections, but they're quite quick. They're always quite surprised at how quickly it goes from start to finish, not realizing that it's existed for probably a few months anyway.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So you're living the characters and you're living the thoughts and themes already in your head, and all you need to do is just type it in.
Well, it certainly makes household chores and boring stuff a lot more interesting.
Right. Absolutely. How has your experience been in publishing, query publishing? How easy or difficult is it?
I've done self-publishing, and in terms of that process, the process is remarkably quickly and easy, and I have no problems. When I wrote Redemption, I half thought I would like to try traditional publishing, so I sent it off to half a dozen, just as COVID struck, and I got an expression of interest from an English publisher who weren't able to commission anything at that time because they'd suspended publication. And I got an immediate offer from the United States. But I read the contract, and there was a business side to it rather than a creative side that, if I'm honest, at that point in my life, I just couldn't handle. My daughter was a lawyer and she went through the contracts for me, but in the end we decided I'm in it for the creativity, and the fine print and so forth was just, at that time, just too much. And I just thought, I'm going to go with this creative process, and I'm going to get it into print myself, and I'm going to enjoy it. But I am going to try the traditional route for my next novel.
Yeah. That's good, and you already have 3 books to your credit, and that should open doors.
Hopefully. But I've also, because I've got my skill level up in self-publishing, several of the Leaky Pens have now published using the same system that I have. So we've been really, really busy, and 2020 was a marvellous year for our publications. And it was really exciting seeing our books appear. But unfortunately, our trips to book fairs locally or whatever just didn't happen because we were all under lockdown and we've just met via Zoom.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic year ushered in the era of Zoom, as we are used to it. Right. And do you also think that the pandemic year particularly has propelled the reading public? I think there has been a surge in reading.
There's been a definite surge of reading, judging by myself and my friends, definitely, and a real interest in writing and books. It's tremendous. It really is. It's a period of growth, unfortunately, of course, not for bookshelves, because all our bookshops have been closed. So it's probably a very good time for the online sales.
Right. Yes, and that's where Amazon comes in. Kindle is a real vista.
Well, it's become an opening, an avenue for publication for our writing group that a few years ago wasn't available to us, and we're jolly thankful for it. It's a blessing.
Yes, that's true. In fact, my work also, as you said, I finally decided to publish it myself. That's how it happened. And it was last year, incidentally.
Yes, a good year for writers.
Right. Now, what has been the best compliment so far?
In the days when Leaky Pens met and shared work, etc., 2 things stick in my mind. One of the stories in Scorpion Tales, I read through to the end, and the sting was in the tail. And when the people around the table all gasped, I knew it had worked. And when I didn't read, I needed to drink tea with you aloud, but a friend read it for me to my group of lovely writing friends. And when several of them shed tears, I knew that the words from the page were hitting people's hearts, and that was humbling but gratifying too.
Yeah, I guess so. That's I think really one thing to do, and it stays with you. These are things that stay with
you. If the written word has the power to make people gasp and make people cry, then somehow I tell myself I must be doing something right.
Absolutely. Right. Now, if you had to sum up this pandemic year in one sentence or one symbol, what would that be?
Writing. It's given me the freedom to devote hours to writing that I wouldn't have allowed myself if I were allowed to do the things I would normally fill my time with. And it's been the most creative period of my life, and I'm very grateful for it.
What are you working on currently? What can we expect?
It's a novel called My Father's House, and it's a generational saga of people who live in a house and the effect it has on them. But it's more about relationships and basically it's about finding a soulmate and losing a soulmate, and it is quite an emotional journey to read. And it's also about people coming to terms with events from their own perspective, and each one, the perspective is true and valid, but the tension arises when those viewpoints don't collide. When they collide, when they don't match. So there's quite a lot of angst and discovery going on. But it's a work in progress, and it's been read through by a couple of people already, and now it's under its second development.
So how old is this Leaky Pens group? How old is this Leaky Pens group? How long has this been around?
I really, it had been going about 2 years when I joined it, and I joined in 2017, so it's about 4 years old. Mm.
That's lovely. So any final message to viewers of the Writer Talks?
Just thank you. I've watched quite a few of your interviews, and you are doing a great job. And to see writers like Barbara Waters and Brian Quinn, well, I hear Brian Quinn, it's so enlightening because you read their words and all of a sudden you get to know the person behind them, and it is a privilege to get to know those writers. So I just think it's wonderful, and thank you for having me along.
Thank you. And I really must thank you for all the support and for taking the time out. And I'm sure, have you thought of a title for your upcoming work?
Sorry?
Have you thought of a title for your upcoming work? In progress, have you thought of a title?
It's called My Father's House. Because it's generational, there are 3 different generations who live in this house, and in each case it's their father's house.
Fantastic. So best luck for you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Well, and hope to see you on the Writer Talks again soon.
That would be lovely, but most of all, thank you, because it's been an honour, a true honour, and a privilege, because having heard the other writers, I really do feel quite humbled that you invited me along, and so grateful for the chance to talk to you.
I'm equally honoured, and thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.